I gotta hit you up with the bad news. And that's what's next on Let's Talk 412. Now, you've probably heard the story. God created the heavens and the earth. He creates this garden, and it's called the Garden of Eden, which simply means, it was a garden of paradise. And he creates this garden. He probably noticed I talk with my hands a lot. This is just who I am. It's what I do. If it's bothering you, I'm really sorry, but I can't stop myself from doing this, unfortunately. Creates trees to grow in this garden, and amongst those trees is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And after he creates this garden, he creates these rivers to flow through and water the garden. He places Adam, the man that he created, into this garden. And he's there to tend it. We find that Adam is naming the creatures. And as the story we know goes, God makes Eve from Adam's rib. And so Adam and Eve are in this garden. God tells them you can eat of any tree of the garden except for one, and that is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We know the story. Serpent tempts Eve. Eve eats of the fruit she gives to her husband. Now the whole world is plunged into sin. Now, I guess the big question is, what is the significance of what happened? That God and human beings were living in close proximity in this garden. And so Adam and Eve, when they eat this fruit, what we learn is that God presents us with a choice. And we can choose to live by God's standards and by God's quote unquote rules, or we can choose to find our own way and to live however we want to live and do whatever is right and wrong in our own eyes. In this story, we find that Adam and Eve decided that they would choose wisdom in their own eyes as opposed to God's wisdom. So therefore, we find that they eat the fruit on the one selling point, that you will be like God, knowing good and evil. And as a result, God judged the serpent, the woman, and the man. Says to the serpent, because you have done this, you're cursed more than all cattle, and more than every beast of the field. On your belly you shall go, and you shall eat dust all the days of your life. And I will put enmity, whatever, between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Judgment on the serpent. To the woman he said, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Things that we're fighting even today, we find originated in the garden. Then to Adam he said, because you have heeded the voice of your wife, and have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for your sake. See, as a direct result, God cursed the ground because of Adam. It says, in toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return. Once again, as a result, pain, suffering, death entered into the world. And instead of us ruling over the tendencies, we constantly fail to subdue this problem of sin. sin is simply not living up to God's standards. So you might think that because, oh, I follow the 10 Commandments or I'm a good person, that somehow you're exempt to God's judgment. But even the best that we do does not meet God's standards. God transcends our nature. So it's impossible for us to meet his standards apart from him. And that's the story of the garden. In Isaiah chapter 64, it says, our righteousness, that means all the good things that we do, are like filthy rags in God's eyes. You can never be good enough. This is the horrible news about this. You can never be good enough apart from God. It's not going to happen. You can try your best. You can dot your I's and cross your T's, but you're never going to reach God's standards. This is the bad news. The bad news is simply that I can't do this. The Bible lets us know all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. The Bible also says, for the wages of sin is death. So because our inability to meet God's standards, death entered into the world. And our only promise and expectation is death. And that's simply a result of sin. So when I go to work, after every 2 weeks, I expect a paycheck. And I'm sure you do, or in the future you will. And the paycheck for sin is death. It's our reality. Everywhere you go, where life is present, there's always the one solid expectation that we don't even have to hope for, that will happen anyways, is that from dust we came, to dust we will return. Because of sin, death entered into the world. And folks, that's the bad news. So the very essence of sin is our usurping of God's position and authority, and us trying to achieve quality of life or whatever by our own means and standards and methods, and our standards will always fall short of God's standards. So sin is more than just what we do. Sin's very essence is alive and well in every human being. And as a result of that sin, our earnest expectation is death. So basically, all I'm saying is that sin is the problem. It's because of sin in me, sin in you, that we can look forward to dying, and we can look forward to an eternity without God. But stay tuned. There's more to the story. This was Let's Talk 412. Join the conversation. Stay tuned, because it doesn't end in bad news. God bless you. Be safe.